Big news weekend, very exciting. Jen Briney from Congressional Dish Podcast is joining me in studio. We'll be talking to Jen more about her show on the bonus show and a little bit later today, but she will be filling in for me tomorrow. It'll be a travel day, very, very long travel day. I might have picked the most inefficient flight itinerary to get to Las Vegas. And the reasons why would bore everybody in here, especially Pat. So I'm gonna skip that story and we'll
How
just
many
get into the news.
stops?
Only one stop.
Oh,
Only
that's not
one
too
stop, but 8.5 hours of flying to get to Las Vegas from Boston, and it's not going to be good for anybody. But plenty of time to use mediocre American Airlines Wi-Fi and to do work. Okay, I like talking about double standards, and double standards exist. For example, when we see the same statistics either believed or not believed, depending on who's in office and who those statistics are good for. And one really good example is gas prices. I'm sure you remember when gas prices went up under George W. Bush, Republicans would say, well, you know, the president only has limited influence over what gas prices do. And then when gas prices went back down under George W. Bush, then George W. Bush had done a really amazing thing by pushing gas prices down. And then when they were up under Obama, the same people who said the president doesn't really influence gas prices were blaming Obama. And then, of course, when gas prices came back down under Obama, you heard nothing effectively from Republicans crediting him. And the reality is usually more nuanced. It's not one or the other. It's, well, presidential policy sort of creates the context in which gas prices could go up or could go down, but it's not really the president themselves that's influencing it. And for me, one of the biggest double standards around statistics has been jobs, right? George W. Bush governed over a disastrous economy. Under Obama, we saw a big jobs recovery, millions of jobs created, unemployment went down, and Republicans sort of were not really willing to accept this. They popularized the labor participation rate conspiracy theories. I don't know if that's something you've talked about. I've covered that extensively, widely debunked. They've called the CBO data fake and completely not believable. And the truth is that if we look into the economic situation, we see that, listen, the president, of course, has some to do with jobs numbers, but there's broader economic circumstances. Bush had a bad economy and a terrible stock market, partially because of 9/11. We could debate how much he was directly responsible for 9/11. Needless to say, the 2008 recession, which came as a result of the mortgage crisis and the credit crisis, certainly deregulation in general impacted that. But it wasn't George W. Bush specifically who did all of that deregulation. And there's no doubt that under the Obama presidency, we were due for somewhat of a recovery, but the stimulus and some other Obama policies probably helped. But that's where we get to our current president, Donald Trump, and the recent jobs numbers, which are not the best jobs numbers, only about 104,000 jobs created in March, which was almost half of the nearly 200,000 jobs that economists expected to see created. And these are the same numbers, Jen, that under President Obama, Donald Trump said were fake numbers and not believable. Early in Trump's presidency, when the numbers were still looking pretty good, all of a sudden they were bragging rights for Donald Trump about how good the economy was. And then now all of a sudden that his jobs numbers are falling short of expectations, we hear nothing about the jobs numbers at all. Do you think that the average Trumpist even cares about this? Like, does it even matter to them what's going on with the jobs numbers, or is it really all narrative for them?
I think it's all narrative. I mean, I don't even think that they're aware of this report, to be honest. It's whether or not they have a job. And so, yeah, I don't know a ton of Trump voters either. So there's also that. I live in California. But the few that I do know, they're more concerned with their own health insurance in their own little worlds. And they just like the guy. I mean, I think it just comes down to that. He's the straight talker or whatever. I don't know. I don't think that these are the type of people that are looking at jobs reports, because if they were, they probably wouldn't be voting for Donald Trump.
The most depressing thing to me is that job creation over several years really hasn't changed much. In other words, when you adjust down, so the January and February numbers that we initially got, that were initially reported, were actually revised in the downward direction, and there were actually 50,000 fewer jobs created in January and February. And when you really look over the long term, including the last few years, job creation has been relatively stable across the last few years of Obama and Donald Trump. And for me, the real disappointing part is that it would be great if we could sort of get beyond the politicization of any one month and sort of look at the broader trends and the realization that, number one, if you didn't believe the numbers under Obama and you believe them under Trump, but when they're good or not, that's a double standard, that's hypocrisy, and that should really concern all of us. But the broader concern for me is that, number one, the job creation wave that's been touted by the current administration doesn't really exist. We're really very, very close to mean job creation. But most importantly, nobody's doing anything to solve the impending job crisis and wage stagnation that we've had, right? Technological unemployment is coming. We don't really have any plan to deal with it. And as I've talked about before, presidential candidates don't want to talk about that because whoever flinches first and says, hold on a second, Trump says he's going to bring back jobs from China. A lot of those jobs don't exist. They've been replaced by machines. As soon as one candidate says that, the other will say that's a defeatist attitude. And that certainly doesn't sound like you're going to fix the problem, even though the truth is neither party is actually dealing with that. And I feel like both Democrats and Republicans are basically given a pass on that issue.
I think that's true. And I think we also have a problem where we blame and give credit to the president for things that the president, like you said before, doesn't really have any control over.
Sure.
So when we're talking about something like creating jobs and really deciding how the economy functions, so much of that is done by Congress through legislation with tax credits and who it gets advantages and who doesn't. And it's also the Justice Department. Like when you think about the end of the Bush years, the Justice Department wasn't going after white collar criminals. And that's really what crashed the economy. It was this mortgage crisis where there was just fraud everywhere. And then in the Obama administration, to be fair, they didn't prosecute it either. So this stuff is still happening. And I think that type of thing, allowing corporate crimes and allowing massive layoffs and just allowing this stuff to go on, a lot of it isn't with the president himself. There's other parts of our government that are acting that are being ignored.
And of course, this isn't to say it doesn't matter who's president, right? Because of course, what we have is a situation where when one party does control all three branches, the House, Senate, and the White House, that provides significant political cover. So just because we can't point to a specific action or an economic result and say, here's what the president did that caused it, there's no question that when you have everybody on the same page, you do have political cover, and nobody is really going to go out of their way to say, hey, the people in my party are actually exacerbating this, even if it is the House or the Senate and not the president that's doing it.
I think there's also a case to be made that there were so many jobs made under Obama that there are just fewer to go around now. Like the unemployment rate's a little bit over 4%, so Trump can't really keep that job creation going. And he could make that argument that there just aren't as many jobs to go around now, but it doesn't really fit in with his style. That's not the braggadocio we're used to with Trump.
That's an example of the sort of realism that it's a no-win for anybody to bring that up. As I mentioned before, like when Mitt Romney was running against President Obama in 2012, and he was making economic predictions about what would be going on. He made some that were crazy, like every college graduate will have a job. Of course, that's not true. It's an impossible promise. But it was pretty clear to the extent that we can even make economic predictions, and our ability to do that is admittedly somewhat limited. It was pretty clear that the second term of Obama or the first term of Romney was going to generally be a pretty good economic period of 4 years. Could have varied, of course, depending on whether it was Romney and Obama. Whatever Romney tax cuts for the rich would have been put in place probably would not have done much to stimulate the economy. But to some degree, like there are economic cycles, and it would be refreshing to hear that sometimes.
That's true. And that's why people support the David Pakman show.
Well, to the extent that they do, I think that's a good thing. So to get back to my main point, what we really need is sort of some comprehensive way of as a society saying, hey, a lot of jobs are going to continue disappearing. Technology is getting rid of a lot of jobs. We continue to see increased productivity from people who are working, but they're not getting those wages. Those wages are actually going to stockholders and to the owners of the company. And that's really the problem that needs to be dealt with. And it's just not being dealt with. And we're not going to see it dealt with when we have 4-year presidential cycles, members of the House of Representatives with 2-year terms who go directly back into campaigning. What's the incentive, right? There's just no incentive, and you cover this in the House and in the House and Senate in particular. What could be changed to actually create an incentive to deal with the long-term problems when you've just got to raise money to be reelected another 18 months from now? I just don't see it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's also, when we're talking about jobs in particular, we also have to keep in mind that when they're counting jobs, are those jobs part-time? Are they paying $7 an hour?
Sure.
Are they actually helping the economy? Because what you need are people that have money to spend.
Right.
You need people that are able to go to restaurants. You need people that are able to go shopping. But if you're getting paid $7 an hour and you live in, let's say, Northern California, where you can't even live anywhere near your job, your money goes to transportation, it all goes to rent, you have nothing left over.
Yeah.
You can look at the jobs report all day, but if it's those types of jobs that are being created, we're not really helping the economy or our society as a whole.
I've expressed, as Pat knows, some concerns about how universal basic income is being touted. And I think it's a great idea. And in fact, I think we're going to need something like it. But I don't know if you've been following how Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and a lot of these effectively de facto oligarchs of major American industry are really in favor of it. And my concern is that if we figure out we're going to give people $9,000 or $12,000 or $16,000 or whatever, you're going to not fix a lot of the systemic problems that exist in terms of the inequality in corporate versus employee negotiating power. We have almost no union representation in the country. It's not going to address the fact that healthcare costs are out of control and many people still don't have access. I want universal basic income or something like it to the extent that it will actually fix some of the problems you're describing. But I want to be sure that it's not just going to be a way to give people another 10 grand, 9 of which will be spent on Amazon stuff that people don't really need type of thing. And I don't know how you deal with that.
Well, I mean, instead of maybe universal basic income, maybe universal housing.
Sure.
You know, so you just have a small apartment that you would get. We can call them the projects, we can call them whatever, but just to give people basic shelter, because coming from Northern California, I can tell you that we have humans living all over the place, in the streets and under freeways. And so I just think when you think what humans need, their basic needs, food, shelter, water, if we can take care of that, then the cash can take care of itself. But like you said, like, let's say you're getting $10,000, I don't know, even $10,000, what? I don't know the numbers. When people are talking about universal basic income, that's a factor too. I also don't know how much we're talking about.
There's two general ideas. One is UBI by itself provides a living wage as defined by what is necessary for, usually the idea is a 1 or a 2 bedroom apartment plus reasonable food costs. Like, it really covers all basic expenses. Those are the sort of more ambitious proposals. The other idea is, what if everybody just gets 10 grand added on? Whether you're working or not, it's not means tested. If you're super rich, you get the 10 grand. If you make no money, you get 10 grand. And the idea is that by eliminating all the bureaucracy of individualized welfare programs, you just save money over the long term by giving everybody 10 grand. But the thing is, that's not a living wage. And that's actually the concern about it.
Well, and maybe it is in central Oklahoma, but in the Bay Area, 10 grand isn't going to do anything.
Not,
and that's where we have so many people living under freeways.
Yeah.
So I do like the idea of providing the things people need, providing these small apartments and being like, listen, if you want to live in this dinky little place that's not great, but it's provided by the government forever, like, you go right ahead. And that can be a safety net that applies to all of us.
Yep.
But the rich people aren't going to take advantage of that because they don't need the dinky apartment. They have a mansion.
And a lot of people on the right will say, well, you're encouraging laziness. You're encouraging people to just live in the, quote, little dinky apartment. You're always going to have free riders in any system that is a sort of social insurance system. The question is, does society as a whole benefit from reducing the number of homeless people? And if the answer is yes, what do you care that someone's choosing to live on 10 grand a year if that's what they want to do? We just shouldn't really be concerned about that, is my view.
Yeah, I'm 100% fine with that. Because, I mean, as a woman who walks alone in the Bay Area all the time, I would like to be able to walk under a freeway underpass without fearing for my life.
There are all sorts of ancillary benefits and also negative externalities sort of to be considered here.
And to make it politically viable too, I don't know if you can get there by just raising taxes on the rich. I think it would have to come from eliminating that bureaucracy that we see in our social welfare programs.
Yeah.
So maybe starting to eliminate unemployment benefits or, you know, like handouts, so we call them, and make that into universal basic income. That's probably the best way forward.
It's actually fiscally conservative to do that, to consolidate a lot of these programs, eliminate the huge apparatus of staffing that is there to determine whether you do or don't qualify. Again, the concern with what Pat is saying, which I agree with, is in the net, you might end up actually not having people with more resources, and then you're not even really moving from the status quo that we have today. But sort of a different conversation for UBI, maybe for some other point. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. Are you on Twitter?
Yes.
What's your Twitter handle?
At Jen Briney.
Jen Briney. Okay, very good. We'll take a break and be back with more after this. The video you just finished watching was made possible by you through the membership program. You can sign up for membership at davidpakman.com/membership. We are viewer-supported independent media. You can use the coupon code IVoted17 for a 40% discount off of your membership.